And
Okay.
speaker
So,
mode.
so we are on page 14, and we're working our way through this Torah portion, which talks about the service in the tabernacle. Remember, the Jews built a tabernacle, which is a temporary, mobile, collapsible sanctuary, place of holiness, a place where someone walked in, there was a palpable sense of God and a palpable sense of connection. And it was a place of function, but the primary function was bringing offerings to God, and the offerings to God was really bringing offerings of ourselves, but through the mechanism of an offering, a physical offering, and a time to draw close to God. And again, the general term for an offering is in the Hebrew is korban, which means in its grammatically, etymologically, is coming close. So we had spoken about different animal offerings. Then we went to the Torah made it clear that there's, that not everybody's going to be able to bring an offering of expensive offerings, let's say a steer. So there's a sheep, and then we went into meal offerings, the grain, and baking loaves or matzahs. So we say after baking the loaves, on page 14 at the top, this is what we're up to, verse 6. Break each one into two pieces and each half in two, so the priest will later be able to easily remove the memorial portion. You must then pour the rest of the log of oil over the loaves. It is a grain offering, and all grain offerings must have the remainder of their log of oil poured on them, except the two types baked in an oven as above. So we went through this, and I showed you last week some diagrams of how it worked, and also how the scoopful of what would be done. We looked at what that is, because that will be mentioned again. Number 7. If your grain sacrifice or offering is a grain offering, fried in a deep frying pan, because there are different types of grain offerings. And this one, we're talking about loaves, and here it's baked in a deep frying pan, or cooked in a deep frying pan. It must be made of 1/10 of an ephah of fine white wheat flour mixed with a log of oil. Here too, the flour is first placed in a vessel containing some of the required log of oil. So put the flour in. It's then mixed with more of this oil and kneaded into 10 loaves. But since in this case the frying pan is deep enough oil will remain to soften the dough, so the resulting loaves will be elastic and will therefore quiver. After frying that, and he brings that because Rashi brings it because it's alluded to in the verse. After frying the loaves, break each one in half, and then each half into quarters, so the priest will later be able to easily remove the memorial portion. After this, pour the rest of the log of oil over them. So we dealt with all the details, the memorial, all of that last week. Thus you must bring, I want to go to 9 and we'll talk a little bit. Thus you must bring to God the grain offering that was made from any of these 5 preparations of flour. In each case, the offerer must bring it to the priest, and the priest must bring it to the southwest corner of the altar. What was said above in 9 regarding the unbaked grain offering applies to all these types of grain offerings. The priest must lift out the memorial fistful. Again, some of this memorial ideas that, so to speak, God is remembering. We're remembering God. We're getting into a conscious zone between us and God. It's called memorial. And there's a fistful that comes out from the grain offering and burn it on the altar. Removing the memorial portion from the flour mixture or broken loaves must be performed with the intention that it be a fire offering. There has to be intent, there has to be consciousness, there has to be a sense of focus on what we're doing, and that this is going to be destined to be consumed by fire, and that we want to do what gives God nachas and to be pleasing to God. It is usually poor people who bring grain offerings, for this is all they can afford. Nevertheless, because their personal offering and offering up their only food is greater than that of those who can afford to offer up more expensive sacrifices, potentially, God is especially appreciative of their offering, considering it as if they had offered up their very selves. So there are a number of things here. One is, and actually, I want to split screen. We'll talk about what we have here. This is this top piece here is a translation. Ignore the bottom piece because maybe we'll deal with that later. This is actually I meant to write. What is this? Is from Maimonides, and Maimonides has his code of law, and in his code of law he has actually really 2 books that deal with the temple or the tabernacle, and its service. And one of the things, this is a translation of one of his sections about what is brought, things brought on the altar, and this is how he concludes that set of laws. So what he says, even though it's things brought on the altar, and a lot of things brought on the altar, his final one talks about oil for meal offerings. Again, meal offerings are not the premium type of offering. There was a steer, or a cow, and a sheep, and this was for someone who couldn't afford the premium style. Since all of these categories of oil that he had spoken about before are acceptable for the meal offerings, why were they listed as separate categories? Okay, that's not a question that we're going to deal with right now. I want to get to his answer. It says that the Torah wanted us to know the superior category that nothing surpasses, those which are equal and those which are inferior. Wanted us to understand the scale. In this way, one who desires to gain merit for himself will subjugate his evil inclination and amplify his generosity should bring his sacrifice from the most desirable and superior type of the item he's bringing. So at one level, on the one level of the scale, because Torah is not simple, Torah life is not simple and it's not unidimensional, and we have sometimes competing values that we have to balance, right? Like we were talking about before about the responsibility to a community and responsibility to save my own life. Those are both values, but they have to be balanced. Here, when it comes to giving of ourselves to the community, whether it's charity, it's to your local library, or it's to the Beis Hamikdash, or to the tabernacle or temple. On the one hand, Torah says, be giving. And what the language he says, subjugate is evil inclination. Evil inclination means the self-protection. If I have X amount of money, I want to hold on to it. Why should I give it away? And if the community needs something, so first of all, I may feel pressured to give something. I might feel, almost like manipulated into giving something. So I'm going to give the least amount possible. Or even if something touches my heart, okay, but the thing is, obviously I have to protect myself. So again, evil inclination, I just did this right before the class. I would have changed the language. Evil inclination makes it sound like it's evil. Taking care of ourselves is not evil, but it is self-directed. And self-direction without opening ourselves up to others' needs is not holy. Let's call it that. It's an unholy inclination to keep all my nickels by me and not think about sharing nickels according to what I can. So therefore, what Maimonides is saying is that the Torah gives us in the offerings a scale. And the scale is for us to know what we can shoot for, because we want to do things right. We want to do things in a respectful way. So, this is something that, again, just to talk about it because it's in our lives. In the old days when there was rummage sales were a good thing. First of all, we had them here a few times. We make a couple $1,000 if Donna's on the phone, and it was a nice thing. It was also a way for people to get rid of things they didn't need and could be useful to someone else, because not wasting is a value. And one person's throwaway is another person's maybe not treasure, but usable thing. So that is a value. That's a good thing. Now on the giving end, let's say I'm going through my basement or my attic and I'm looking for what I can give to rummage sale. The reason the things are in my basement or my attic are often because I have no use for them anymore. Now, not having use for them anymore could be because my kids outgrew them, or because I wouldn't let them wear it, even if it didn't outgrow them. It's not good. It doesn't look good. Whatever. It's not something that I would want my family to wear. Those are two very different things. One is that it's in good shape. I just have no need for it anymore. One is that it's not in good shape, but someone else could use it. They have lower standards, and that too is a value, a mitzvah that we're making use of it. But on the giving end, I shouldn't be the person who just gives away things that that I consider beneath my standards. Or it's really one for many people, and we're actually now we're sending things to Ukraine, and one of the things we're sending clothing, whatever. One of the things that circulated from the Chabad rabbis is try to make sure that it's things that people would actually have their own family use. And that gives some dignity. We don't want to only give them throwaways. We don't give them something. Well, it's not good enough for me, but listen, you're in a war zone. It's good. Use it, and be happy with it. By the way, that it's true. They will be happy with it. But for my own humanity, I shouldn't just be giving away things that are beneath me. I should be giving away things that I would use, and I could use, whether it's money or anything else. But this is that I don't. I'm giving. That it's not. It's that I'm giving it myself, and giving it myself means something that it's something I could have used. I could, if it's money, for sure, I could have used it to buy myself something pleasurable, or whatever it is, or just make myself feel more secure with my 401k, whatever. But here, I'm giving away of myself, and that's what Maimonides is saying, is that the Torah wants us to know the scale so that we can test our own generosity. And then he gives us a general rule beyond the laws. He does that from time to time as he closes any section. He says the same applies to everything given for the sake of the Almighty, who is good. What do you mean that God is good? If God is good, we should be good. And what is good means that we're good in giving go together. That we should be giving, we should be generous. It should be the most attractive and highest quality. Anything we do for God should be good. If one builds a house of prayer, it should be more attractive than his own dwelling. If he feeds a hungry person, he should feed from the best and most tasty foods of his table. If he clothes one who's naked, he should clothe him with his attractive garments. If he consecrates something, he should consecrate the best of his possessions. As the Torah states, all the superior quality should be given to God. Now, that does not mean, just a second, that does not mean that, literally we have to look and say, well, my house is like this, and we have to make the shul nicer. If I have a really nice house, it's you won't have to measure. But I think what Maimonides is saying is, if I live well, I shouldn't be okay with my community library being in a shack. Not that I have to build it all, but I should want to step up to the plate so that it's a nice place, or my community hospital, or community's house of worship, whatever it may be. Donna, you asking something? No. Okay. So it's something that when we're giving, we should give nice. Let it be nice, and we should want the communal functions to be nice. And it says a lot about a community when not only do people live well, but their school is nice, and their house worship is nice, and their hospital is nice, and it's their communal needs. And that's what Maimonides is saying. Now, balanced with that, what's interesting is that Maimonides brings that whole piece when he's talking about meal offerings, which was not the nicest. Meal offerings is the lowest offering on the totem pole, lowest on the food chain, and that's where Maimonides lets loose. We should be giving of the best of ourselves, and part of that is the idea that giving of the best of ourselves is sometimes we have the capacity to do something physical, to be able to help physically. Sometimes we're actually giving of ourselves. And the dollar that the person is giving is not a tremendous, it doesn't have tremendous buying power, but they're giving of themselves, extending themselves. And that's what's beautiful. And Maimonides, as the Rebbe pointed out, and that's we're going to read something now, I think he specifically placed this lesson not when he was talking about bringing expensive offerings. He teaches the lesson when he's talking about bringing inexpensive offerings, which would seem contradictory. But I think one way we can read that is that he's trying to say it's not just about the dollar amount of what you're giving. And if the dollar amount of what you're giving is giving of yourself, you're extending yourself to really, we each have our own comfort level, and our generosity is very, very individual, very, very subjective. That's a Torah idea. Just as needs are totally subjective. What people need, it's we can't sit and assess, well, this person, people only need this, only need that. You really have to talk to them to find out what they need. And what's considered generosity for one is not considered generosity for another. So even if someone is blessed with a lot of means, it's not so much about the number that they're giving. It's about whether they're giving of themselves. And certainly a person who does not have that capacity, if they're giving a smaller number, does not mean that they're not giving a beautiful contribution to the greater good, where that's considered giving of themselves. So we'll take a look at note 9 in the Hasidic Insights. Considering it as if they had offered up their very selves. When we bring a beautiful animal as an offering to God, we are liable to take pride in our generosity and the fact that we've fulfilled God's will. Although on the right side of the bottom of 14, in the best and most beautiful manner. In contrast, when all we can afford to bring to God is a meager grain offering, such feelings of pride are most likely absent. The sole reason we bring our sacrifice is to subjugate ourselves to Him. We're surrendering. We're doing what God wants. God wants it, fine. I don't feel proud about it. I don't understand it. I can't afford it. But I'm doing what God said. That's beautiful. It's that we're putting ourselves aside and following God's guidance. It is therefore specifically the grain offering of a poor person that most eloquently expresses the essence of the sacrifices. Which the essence is the offering up of ourselves to God. And Nachmanides, rabbis in the Middle Ages, write this very explicitly when it comes to trying to understand the offerings to the extent we can. Is that in the one offering whatever it was, whether it was challahs or an animal, they really have to think about offering themselves. In their minds, to be offering themselves. When we truly negate our sense of self and undertake to serve God with simple and direct faith, rather than for any ulterior motives or personal ambitions, we are assured of acceptance and atonement. So the key. Why does a person bring an offering? A person brings an offering because they're trying to they're trying to plug into a connection with God. Either because they feel they've been out of connection or something good happened and they want to be able to say thank you. There are different reasons a person will bring an offering. If it's about the relationship, then the more you make space for God, for the other, the more you're doing to strengthen the relationship. So therefore, we're saying is that this idea of pushing aside ulterior motives or personal ambitions it ensures us more of the success in trying to whether it's atonement or acceptance by God. The selflessness is embodied most in the approach of the poor man, which is why it is about him specifically that God says, I consider it as if he offered up his very self. God says that when you bring these offerings, I will see it as though you brought the offering, you brought yourselves as an offering. Okay. I'll go to verse 10 now. Similarly, the remainder of every grain offering is to be treated the same way as the remainder of the unbaked grain offering. It will belong to the priests. First Aaron, or after him, whoever the then current high priest in any generation, will take whatever portion of it he chooses, and then his sons, or after them the officiating priests, will take whatever is left, dividing it up among themselves. Nonetheless, their portion is still considered an offering of superior holiness. And therefore, they may only eat it from the point in time when the memorial service has been burned up on the altar as one of the fire offerings of God. If, however, the offerer is himself a priest, and then his grain offering must be burned up in its entirety. None of it may be eaten. Nonetheless, oil and frankincense, and we looked into the frankincense last week, must still be added to the flour. On the right side, like in the middle, lower part of the middle of the page, is verse 11. No grain offering that you sacrifice to God may be made out of anything leavened. Okay, we're coming up to Pesach. Nothing leavened. We call chametz is leavening. Sa'ir is another word used in Torah, but it's more the leavening agent. Not that cannot be used. For you must not burn up any leavening agents or any sweet fruits as a fire offering to God. So it's interesting. The word in Torah here is the way I would imagine this has been translated for generations, including today, is that we cannot bring any leavening agents or honey on the altar. The word in the verse is dvash. Dvash means honey. Now, why did this Chabadster translation call it sweet fruits? Because even though it says honey, when the Torah says honey, it may mean honey, but it often means either date honey or any sweet fruit. So, for example, when the Torah lists off we have like land flowing with milk and honey, right? The honey, we're talking about the honey, and we have 7 species, which Israel is blessed with, and we looked at them as special symbols of the blessing of the land. Honey is mentioned there also. Honey is not agricultural. Honey doesn't grow, but as Rashi will say, actually Rashi says here and says other times in the Torah when this idea of honey with regard to the land of Israel is mentioned, it refers to date honey. In other words, that it's they take the flesh of the date and they treat it, and that's they call that honey. Now that in this case, Rashi says, since honey doesn't necessarily mean bee honey, this goes for anything sweet. Any sweet, in this case, it would be fruits, because we bring those on the offering. There's no place for sugar on the offering, but there was for agriculture, sweet fruits. They fall under the rubric of honey, and they're not brought on the temple, on the altar. Now, okay, that's the instructions. That's what the boss says. So, what's the inside of that? What's an insight? So first of all, let's talk the leavening agent is a little easier for us to understand, because when it comes to Passover, to Pesach, which we're coming up on, Pesach is considered, there it's matzah and no chametz, because Pesach is a freedom holiday, it's a growth holiday, and we talk about the idea of matzah, the difference between matzah in ingredients, between matzah and bread, is that one is allowed to rise, either with a leavening agent or even without a leavening agent, but it's allowed to rise. Matzah is not allowed to rise. So matzah symbolizes, well, the bread would symbolize the rising, like the bloated ego, and matzah symbolizes humility, and which is our humility would allow us to be honest with ourselves, to be able to see ourselves and where we need to strengthen ourselves, and that's really a critical opening to growth. Being able to feel that I'm a good person, but I'm not perfect, and it's okay for me to digest my imperfections and then work on them. But I'm not going to work on them unless I first digest them. So the idea of here it's so'er, which is this leavening agent, symbolizes this puffiness of the ego. Now, puffiness of the ego, it's also a difficult balance. We should have a sense of self, and we should have a sense of courage. I mean, for people in the Ukraine to say, who are we to be able to fight Russia, and let's just surrender and act in what we may call a humble way? Who says there's any holiness in that? The idea of standing up for the right thing, and that's with a sense of self. That's a good thing. That's holy. Doing that in going beyond a healthy self-perception to what we call more of a shallow arrogance. That's not healthy. But there isn't holiness if I am very proficient in math. There's no holiness in me saying, well, really, I don't know too much math. That's not true. It's a lie. There's no holiness there. It's for me to say, yes, I do. Do you need any help? Something I can help you with? But not to think that necessarily we're Albert Einstein. I don't, each one needs to have an accurate self-perception, and also to recognize that we were fortunate in perhaps in our schooling and in our natural skill set, not to get become a legend in our own mind, but to recognize our own skills and talents that we bring to the world, and acknowledge them to ourselves or to others if that's necessary. So the idea of self is that's fine. It's holy. The idea of, and so it gets a problematic when we move out of that, so it goes too far with that. And here, when it comes to the altar was a place. The tabernacle was a place where there was a more intense sense of surrender because of God. So even a person who has, I use the example of someone who has math proficiency, they're not denying it there, but it's just, I'm talking to the infinite. I'm connecting with the infinite. There's nothing else. And therefore, even what is normally more a healthy sense of self and one's skill set, it really didn't have much of a place there because it was losing oneself in connection with the divine. It's not that it was bad, it just had no place there. Now, when it comes to honey or these sweet fruits, again, the Torah uses the word honey. So I guess the best way for us to get our minds around the mystical angle on this, the insight into what this is that I was thinking about this morning, the best way to do, best way to approach this. So let's try it this way. You notice what I put down before, I'd written, in case we were going to talk about it, I'd written this. You see at the bottom here. So this is a Hebrew word, chesed. It means kindness. This is another word, gevura, which can mean strength. It could also mean strictness. So these are two very primary energies within God and within us. Right hand, left hand, right side, left side. They're very they're common. These are commonly referenced in mystical writings, and understanding that there's a flow in life, and chesed is when I'm giving. So it's kindness to a pauper, but it could be someone when I finish the class and I see someone in the hall and I embrace them either physically or emotionally with friendliness. That's chesed. It's connection. Gevura, at its core, would mean that I leave space. So even here's a person who oh wow, I'm embracing them. Say, how have you been? I haven't seen you in so many years. But there's some things I shouldn't ask. Is even if I want to totally embrace the person, there are limits to that. There's, depending on who the person is, you have to give them their space. You have to respect their privacy. And that's a gevura thing. So gevura is really having the inner strength to discipline ourselves and to be able to step out of ourselves and step out of an emotional rhythm we're in. So if here I'm so happy to see the person, I know I'm talking, I still have to maintain a balance that I'm not going to overwhelm them, and I'm not going to stand there. They were on their way somewhere. How much time do they have? And also my questions, I mean, we all know what it means to give space. So gevura, the Torah, the Talmud tells us, asks us, who is a gibur, a valiant one, and which is the same word as gevura. It's a valiant one is the person, but the gevura is what they exercise, what they evince, what they manifest. So it says, who is a valiant one? A person who is able to conquer their own instincts. So it's inner discipline and it's conquering instincts. Now, sometimes that comes to strictness. Now, what does that mean? Because if we assume that a person always, they are again, not all of us are like this, but there is this default position of wanting to connect with others, and relationships are the stuff of life. Being able to stand back is respectful, but that can become aloofness. Similarly, if we're giving, if I'm with my grandchildren, and I want to give them things, I want them to be happy. I want them to be happy with that Zaidi was good to them. So if they're in here, I've got seltzer mixed nuts to give to them. If they're in my house, I have some junk I can give them. But should I? So I have to temper. I want to be sure I want to give them cookies, but is that good for them? I have to speak to their parents first. So I have to withhold my giving. Now, there's healthy withholding, and then there's too much. I'm not giving anything because I don't want to spoil them. So that in the how things evolve, both within us and within the spiritual cosmos, within the metaphysical cosmos, the idea of gevura at its core within the divine is God leaving space for us, which is a good thing. Our God limiting the untrammeled flow of infinite divinity, so that God can channel something that's approachable to us. If God just lets it rip with all infinity, we're going to disappear. We're totally overwhelmed. We want blessings within within our system, something that's not going to override our system, that we can appreciate, that we can feel. That too much is not good either. So the chesed is in the case of God, it's giving, and that's the rhythm of chesed. It's God giving, letting it all flow. But letting it all flow means there's no space for us. It's infinity overtakes the world. The infinite oneness overtakes the world. There's all oneness, so where's there space for us? So God limits. Something we call tzimtzum, God constricting and God's presence. So in the mystical writings, Kabbalistic writings, say that God is, before creation of the world, where all of existence, if there was such a thing that we can call existence, is all godliness. Godliness is the source of goodness, of of genuine tranquility, pleasure, whatever human words we attach to it. One of the words we attach to it is sweetness, because Splenda is sweet, sugar is sweet, and then there are a child's smile is sweet. A touch can be sweet. A tune can be sweet. There's sweetness that's not so tangibly anchored in the physical. It's sweetness, the concept that all comes from God. God is the source of sweetness, but God again is untrammeled. So God, a symbol of God limiting that sweetness and making it approachable to us, in the words of the great Kabbalists, is honey. Doesn't mean honey, it means something intensely sweet that we can taste. It's really, the language is, that's an example of God's gevura, God's withholding the untrammeled sweetness and creating something for us very, very tangible and very much within our taste buds, within our human system, that we can digest and we can appreciate. That's honey. So that's all a good thing. And when we dip an apple into honey on Rosh Hashanah, what are we saying? That the apple is one thing, but there's the honey part, and because we dip challah into honey also, there's the honey is on the table, Rosh Hashanah, and we keep it on the table through up till Sukkot in Chabad circles. The idea of honey is that we want to have a tangible, appreciable sweetness. God blesses me. I believe that. God loves me. That's great. But that can be at some metaphysical level. That actually somehow God is fueling my soul and blessing. But I'd like to see it practical. I'd like to see it in my life. In what I need to be able to taste God's sweetness, not just to have it in my mind's eye and faith. And in blessing ourselves for a new year, we want tangible sweetness. And that's all good. There's no downside to that. One of the things is that in the temple, similar to the way we said, in coming into the tabernacle in connection with God, saying, I have my skill set, and God gave me the skill set, and I worked for it, and all those things, and I should not be saying, oh, I don't have it. When I'm in coming connection with God, it's not a relevant part. I'm connecting with God, me and my essence, beyond the skill set, and looking to God and God's essence. I'm embracing my loving parent, creator, divine spouse, however we're going to frame it. What mystics say is even our appreciation at that point for the human honey is not something that should be on the altar. That should not be working its way in to the equation of the embrace of God. God is the honey. God, the sweetness is in being able to have God in my life. Do I want to experience in human blessing? Of course I want to. And that's maybe why I walked in to begin with, because I want a connection with God, because I want to feel God's blessing in my life. And if I feel God's blessing in my life, then ultimately I want to feel it at a very tangible level. And there's nothing wrong with me wanting that. But when I'm in that, at the pinnacle of connection, and I'm bringing something to the altar, honey is not part of the equation. It's not what I'm going to get out of you. When two people really care about each other and they're looking at each other and they're talking about the relationship and they're looking into each other's eyes, should not be the thought of because I'm going to need you to make me a kugel. I'm going to need you to take care of me when I get old, whatever. There's a connection, and our personal honey, that is sweetness that we've been drawing from it. It's a great thing, but that's not the connection. The connection is beyond that. This person is great because she makes me a kugel. This person matters to me because she matters to me. And as an outgrowth of that, it's reciprocal. So she'll make me a kugel. But it's not about the honey. Really doesn't have a place there at the juncture of connection. So from that perspective, see that whenever we bring this offering to God, in verse 11 we say there's no leavening agents or any sweet fruits. So again, I'm using honey because the Torah uses the language of honey, but honey is a broad term in Torah to also include anything of intense sweetness. I will leave it over here. That's okay with you. Are there any questions? With that. Not, we can all pray for peace throughout the world, especially in the Ukraine. They need a lot of stuff, and they need our prayers.
Rabbi?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, the donations through Chabad, where are they directed to in the Ukraine?
It depends. I mean, we can send to Kyiv. They definitely need. Right now,
where are you sending money?
I'm actually sending now to Lvov, because from there they're sending out. It's very hard to get anything into Kyiv right now.
Right.
So we're sending to Lvov. I'm sending to people I know.
Are you sending dollars or actual?
Right now we're sending goods. We're also sending dollars. Yeah, sending dollars, and they could use it. And the people I know, that they're directing it. Right now, the hotspots, there are like 4 hotspots. The big hotspots are Kyiv and Kharkov, and Belychikas and Mariupol are 2 difficult places. But the real heat is not in those 2 smaller places. The real heat is in Kharkov and Kyiv. But there's a lot of, this is going on all over the place, and there's a lot of pain elsewhere too. So, the people on the ground will know best where to direct it. Lvov seems to now be more accessible to get things there, and for them to be able to spread it out. So I'm sending it there now. It may change. I'm in touch with people in Dnipropetrovsk also, or they call it Dnipro now, which right now is somewhat safe, but it's not. They're very worried. But at least I can get things there.
Are you sending it to someone you personally know?
Yeah. You mean the rabbi there? Yeah, he's the distributor. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Have a great week. Share good news.